just be missing the first few minutes. That's okay as long as we get to questions.
Okay, so we will continue on with the presentation. I think I was going to go to the next slide. Did I go? No? Yeah. Marie-Claire, can you try to get me to go to the next slide? It worked last time you did it.
I'm not sure what
I'm concerned if I press the button too many times, it's going
to skip ahead.
Yeah. It seems. There we go. Yeah, the magic. Yeah.
Sorry.
So this is the first of three, I guess, stakeholder sessions that we're planning. The first one is today, and what we want to do is we want to present the scope of the plan and also our science questions, or what we're calling now monitoring questions, and then ask for big picture feedback about your needs for the plan. In our next session, we're planning to do this likely in March. We're going to be talking about our methods that we have been using to actually assess the monitoring network, and then some of the results of these methods. So show you how these methods are being used to actually develop a core monitoring program for the province of Alberta. And then our third session, we're planning to tentatively planning for May of 2018. Where we want to present our draft results, basically our draft results of our plan, and then ask for feedback from stakeholders. Our intent, or I guess it's not our intent, our direction is to have the plan done by the summer of 2018, and for very good reason that there's potential to do a budget ask based on what's incorporated within our plan. So there's opportunity there. So I'll start off first talking about the scope of the plan and the monitoring questions that are incorporated in the plan. So the overall outcome of the plan is indicated on the screen. The plan will have a definition of a core long-term monitoring program for air quality and deposition in Alberta, and it'll address most current and emerging urban and rural air quality issues. And if some of you may have been in the air quality business for the last number of years, this is quite similar to the goal of the 1995 plan that was done by CASA and also by the 2009 plan. So basically we wanted to make sure we're aware of the previous work that has been done and that we're building upon that work. And then as another part of the outcome from the plan, we will also have a process for planning, prioritizing, and delivering specific focused monitoring activities. And we're going to talk about focused monitoring activities more throughout this webinar. And so I just wanted to say that focused monitoring activities are usually monitoring activities that are shorter term in time scale, so 1 to 3 years or 1 to 5 years, something along those lines. And they're very focused on addressing a specific monitoring question or science question or scientific hypothesis. So if there's a if there's a problem that's identified through the long-term monitoring network, we could use focused monitoring to try to understand that problem. So in terms of the scope of the plan will include the monitoring questions that will form the basis of the core long-term monitoring network for a province. It'll also identify the core long-term monitoring data necessary to answer those monitoring questions, as well as the gaps in the current network and changes that are needed to address those monitoring questions. It'll identify a process to consistently initiate, conduct, prioritize, and deliver focused monitoring studies for the province of Alberta, especially those actually that are led by Alberta Environment and Parks. And it'll also include recommendations to improve monitoring protocols to assure the province to ensure that they're consistent throughout the province. So in terms of the monitoring protocols, the plan itself will not contain monitoring protocols, but if it looks like there's a need to have improved monitoring protocols for networks such as the Deposition monitoring network or precipitation chemistry monitoring network or the passive monitoring network, then we will note that within our 5-year plan, and within EMSD there will be a process initiated to improve those monitoring protocols. So in terms of what will not be included in the plan, at least this is what our thoughts are at this time. We will not comment on the current state of regulatory or fence line monitoring in Alberta. If there is regulatory monitoring that is in place right now, that is, I guess, synergistic with what makes sense from a provincial core monitoring perspective, then that regulatory monitoring station may be included as part of backbone monitoring network, but we're not going to make comments on the actual way regulatory monitoring is done in the province. We will not include oil sands monitoring that is not directly related to provincial reporting requirements identified by regional, provincial, and national frameworks. So what that means is that we will include in the oil sands region, we will include monitoring for the Canadian Ambient Air Quality Standards, for land use regional plans, or for other national or provincial frameworks, but we won't be touching things like the Forest Health Monitoring Program or Enhanced Deposition Monitoring Programs. Those are handled through the Oil Sands Monitoring Program. We will not include monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions or ambient GHG concentrations not related to understanding or interpreting air quality. So we will potentially include monitoring of air quality and deposition parameters that will help us understand how the climate is changing, but we won't be monitoring GHG emissions as part of this particular monitoring plan. We won't be determining the types of monitoring projects that should be undertaken by other groups such as airsheds. So what this means is that we're not going to dictate what types of monitoring airsheds should be doing. Of course, we do want to consider to do monitoring in partnership with airsheds and using the airshed partnerships as much as we possibly can, but we're not going to tell airsheds what to do. And we're also not going to outline the budgets and funding models for air quality monitoring within the scope of the 5-year plan. We will have to determine the budget of the monitoring activities as a process in the summer of 2018 in order to do our budget ask. But right now, this is not part of the scope of the 5-year plan. So I was just wanting to go through some of the monitoring questions that we have. There's 4 monitoring questions that we want to address within the 5-year plan. The first monitoring question, I'll just read it here. Does ambient air quality and acid deposition in Alberta meet regional limits, provincial objectives, and national standards that are indicated in the frameworks? So this is in reference to monitoring that's necessary to report against the various thresholds in the regional, national, and provincial frameworks. Some of them indicated here: the Canadian Ambient Air Quality Standards, the Provincial Acid Deposition Management Framework, and the regional land use plans under the land use framework. So we want to indicate the monitoring that's necessary to address those frameworks. And we will definitely be working with stakeholders, and we'll be working with other areas within Alberta Environment and Parks to make that determination. Question 2, what is the impact, what impact do air pollutants have on human health, odor, and ecosystem function? What are the origins of or sources of these air pollutants? So this is more regarding additional analysis that is necessary if there's negative impacts from a human health, odor, or ecosystem function perspective. So there may be, the long-term monitoring network may determine that there is a problem with, I guess, a human health issue in a certain part of the province. And this question is more related to developing focus studies to address those, investigating the cause of those kinds of issues. Also, it could include longer-term monitoring, such as reporting of the Air Quality Health Index, and also seasonal monitoring activities, such as PM, improved particulate matter monitoring associated with wildfire smoke in areas where we have gaps. And wildfire smoke seems to be much more of an issue than it was, say, 5 years ago. So as the last bullet says here, air quality issues may require further investigation through shorter term focus studies and collaboration with human health and ecosystem function experts. So that's question 2. And now I'll go to question 3, monitoring question 3. So this is more in regards to looking at long-term trends in air quality and deposition. Have air quality and deposition changed over time, and how does this relate to factors such as changes in emissions and climate? So this is really looking at the core long-term monitoring network across the province and looking to see if there are significant changes, up or down changes, and then if there are changes, then it might require further investigation, such as those that would be addressed by the question number 2. So this question will also address spatial gaps in air and deposition monitoring networks. So I guess that I wanted to emphasize that there are gaps in monitoring across the province, and we'll show that in our subsequent slides. And we want to address those gaps with this 5-year plan. And question 4 is a little bit ambitious, I think, for a 5-year plan. And I think we need to recognize that, is how will air quality and its effects on human ecosystem function change in the future under various emission scenarios. So it's more of looking at predicting future air emission scenarios and trying to conduct air modeling to determine what air quality would be based on those emission scenarios. At the present time, within our division, we don't really have the resources available to do this type of work. So it's a little bit aspirational, but we will try to address this within our 5-year plan as well. So I just wanted to talk about the current air monitoring that's going on in the province, air and precipitation chemistry monitoring, and then some ideas that we have for adjustments to that monitoring, or I guess processes for improving that monitoring. That will be covered in the 5-year plan. So first, just a little bit of a description of the way monitoring is done in the province of Alberta. This is based on continuous air monitoring stations. Basically, it's a distributed model. It's not just like many other jurisdictions. It's the government that delivers the monitoring. In Alberta, government delivers very, very little portion of the air monitoring. Of the total of 130 monitoring stations, Alberta Environment and Parks still operates 7 of those. We basically rely on the 10 airshed organizations in the province that operates close to 70 of the air monitoring stations, and that includes the permanent and the portable monitoring stations. And industry right now also is required to conduct air monitoring at about 50 air monitoring stations. Environment and Climate Change Canada is also in this picture with most of their efforts in the oil sands region, conducting focused monitoring studies. So it is very much a distributed model. We have 10 airsheds organizations in the province. There are advantages to using airshed organizations to deliver monitoring, some of those being improved transparency of data and of the monitoring activities, and also better participation from stakeholders in these airshed organizations. One of the big negatives is that these airshed organizations need funding and consistent funding, and that has been an ongoing issue and becoming more of an issue in recent years. So on this here, this map here focuses on the continuous and integrated monitoring that's going on in the province. So these are the monitoring stations that provide the hourly air quality data that's used to determine things like the air quality health index. The red dots are the airshed or government stations, and the green dots are the industry stations. I want to indicate here that the green dots we haven't ground truthed all of the locations of those industry stations, so there could be some changes to those as we develop the plan. There's about 130 continuous air monitoring stations in the province if you include the permanent and portable stations. A number of suites of parameters are measured depending on where the station is. If it's an urban station, that tends to measure pollutants that come from urban sources. If it's an industrial stations, it tends to measure things like SO2 and hydrogen sulfide that come from those industrial sources. And then we also have the air quality health index reported at 32 communities across the province right now. So in terms of what we want to address for this network in this plan, in this 5-year plan, is we want to identify gaps and redundancies within the province and then make revisions to that network. So if you look, as an example, up to the northwestern part of the province, there's very little monitoring going on, which is an identified spatial gap, and that's just an example of what some of the gaps are. And if you look with the 10 airshed organizations are indicated in the shaded areas on this map. And if you look outside of the airsheds, you can see that's likely where most of the spatial gaps exist in the province. So we want to improve that consistency throughout the network. We want to define monitoring stations that will be used for the Canadian Ambient Air Quality Standards reporting and Land Use Framework reporting. And again, as I mentioned before, we'll be doing this with other areas of Alberta Environment and Parks. And we are also currently considering a possible network evaluation method. So we'll show you an example of one of the methods we used for a suitability analysis or a geospatial analysis that we did for precipitation chemistry monitoring, and we're looking at doing similar kinds of analysis for our other monitoring networks as well. So in terms of spatial variation of air quality, looking at trying to understand how air quality is changing in space and also in time throughout the province, we usually use passive air samplers over the last number of years. If you do look at the map here and look at the shaded areas, you can see that most of the passive samplers are located within the shaded areas, within the air sheds. And in some areas, there are high concentrations of these passive samplers. And other areas, there are the very limited numbers of these passive samplers. So there's obviously spatial gaps within this monitoring network that need to be addressed. So that I guess what we really want to do is we want to look at the best methods for looking at the spatial and temporal variation of air quality across the province. We want to, and we are currently looking and evaluating the existing passive sampler data. So we've obtained the passive sampler data from all the airshed organizations. We haven't obtained it from the industry because it's not as accessible as the airshed data. And we have, just to let you know, we have identified some inconsistencies between the way passive sampling is done over time and between different areas of the province. And I think there might be a need to look at defining a monitoring protocol for passive sampling so that when it is conducted, we can compare data from one part of the province to another part of the province. Also, we are looking at alternative monitoring technologies there. Over the past number of years, there have been several monitoring systems that will actually provide more frequent data than monthly data, and for more parameters that uses solar power or other low power technologies, and potentially we could augment our spatial monitoring network with these types of technologies. So part of our plan will be to test a number of these types of technologies that are in existence. And another part of looking at the spatial variation air quality in the province is also looking at satellite information. So again, satellite monitoring technology is something that is improving drastically over the last number of years. And there is now opportunity to get potentially get real-time information to supplement spatial gaps throughout the province. So we'll be looking into that as well. This here is a slide showing the precipitation chemistry monitoring network, and as I've alluded to earlier, we have actually already looked at this network using some analysis techniques, and we'll show how we are suggesting changes to the Alberta Environment and Parks portion of the monitoring network. The monitoring objective is very important to establish when you're looking at evaluating a monitoring network. What monitoring objectives do you have? So this monitoring objective is to provide ion concentrations in precipitation to inform impacts of wet deposition of sulfur and nitrogen on sensitive receptors. So we did evaluate the network based on this monitoring objective, and I'll show that in subsequent slides. The current precipitation monitoring network, we have nine wet deposition stations operated by Alberta Environment and Parks. There are also wet deposition monitors operated by the West Central Airshed Society and Wood Buffalo Environmental Association. And in addition, Environment and Climate Change Canada operates wet precipitation chemistry monitoring through the CAPMON monitoring network, and also at the enhanced deposition monitoring sites in the oil sands region. So this slide shows focused air monitoring studies, and as I indicated before, focused monitoring studies usually occur for a short period of time, 1 to 3 year time frame, and they're very focused, I guess by the name of the program, on answering a specific question or one or two specific questions. In the past, we have used focus monitoring to do a number of things indicated on this slide: look at snapshots of air quality data throughout the province, explore sites for potential permanent monitoring, investigate potential air quality issues. If there is an issue identified by a community, we would use this type of monitoring to investigate this, and also support emergency response. Other examples include monitoring air quality during wildfires. On the right-hand side of the slide, it shows a portable EBAM monitor. So this is a portable particulate monitor. Alberta Environment has 10 of these right now in our possession, and we've been deploying them every year in areas where forest fire smoke is either occurring or expected to occur. And in addition, other airsheds such as Wood Buffalo Environmental Association has similar portable monitors. So, and currently the focus studies conducted by Alberta Environmental and Parks usually come through our compliance division, or they come through requests from stakeholders. The process right now to kind of triage these these focus monitoring studies is somewhat ad hoc, and I think we need to improve that process as part of this plan. And also our focus studies can be conducted directly by us, or they can be conducted in collaboration with external partners. So in terms of how we want to address focused air monitoring with our 5-year plan, we will develop a process to initiate, plan, prioritize and deliver focused monitoring studies. It will contain the following as indicated on the slide: identify and communicate a process for initiating studies, identify AEP and stakeholders' information needs, prioritize information needs and ensure that they are aligned with core monitoring questions, design focus studies that will provide useful information to address the information needs. And I think I wanted to make a bit of a point here. Sometimes, and I think Alberta Environment is somewhat guilty of this, we tend to address all information needs using our mobile air monitoring lab, when really that particular unit only provides a snapshot of information and it may not address the need at all. So we really need to put the appropriate monitoring in place that will address the monitoring question that has been defined for us. And then we want another part of it, which maybe we haven't done as good as we can, is ensure that the results of the focus studies are actually communicated to the public. This slide just shows the existing quality assurance and quality control. We do have the air monitoring directive that was developed primarily by Air Policy of Alberta Environmental Parks in 2016. A very good job done by Air Policy on this document. It sets out the requirements for monitoring and reporting air quality in the province of Alberta. In addition, Alberta Environment also does audits of ambient air quality monitoring stations. We tend to monitor the air sheds more frequently than we do the industrial sites because of our resource constraints at the present time. But we have improved our audit program over the last number of years. So the 5-year plan will not necessarily, I think I mentioned this before, will not necessarily focus on developing monitoring protocols, but it should identify some areas where monitoring protocols are needed. And some examples indicated here are monitoring protocols for wet chemistry monitoring, and I'll go into that a little bit more, and also monitoring protocols for passive monitoring. So this slide shows current and future data evaluation and reporting. As I think most people know, we have the Air Quality Health Index available through Alberta Environment and Parks website at airqualityalberta.ca. Also, it's available through a number of airshed websites as well. And I should indicate that the web service that is used by the Air Quality Health Index, the actual web service, is the most frequently accessed web service that the government of Alberta has, which is a little bit surprising, but it's interesting. Also, the quality control data is provided through Alberta Air Data and also through some airsheds websites. The Wood Buffalo Environmental Association has quality control data on their website as well. There's standard reporting against Canadian ambient air quality standards and regional air quality frameworks that currently occurs. There's also, I guess in the future, we're going to have non-continuous data and emissions information coming into a central system that's currently in process of, I guess, scoping out. And this will be, the requirement for that reporting will be January 2019 as per the Air Monitoring Directive. We're looking at developing a schedule for environmental condition reporting for the Office of the Chief Scientist. So this would come out of Environmental Monitoring and Science Division. So the schedule would indicate when reports such as the standard reports such as the CAKES reports and the land use framework reports would come out. But it would also indicate when we would have, I would say, more, I guess, more scientific reports, such as those on reporting on the state of the environment and environmental condition would come out. So we're looking at a schedule for that as well. We're looking at more knowledge translation and products for the public, more investigative and technical synthesis reports, and more contributions to the scientific literature through peer-reviewed journals. So I wanted to show you the example for precipitation chemistry and monitoring. And again, this is our initial assessment results, just as a bit of an example. So as I indicated before, we do have 9 precipitation chemistry monitoring stations operated by Alberta Environment and Parks in the province of Alberta. The purpose of the precipitation chemistry monitoring network is to collect ambient ion concentrations that can be used to understand deposition of wet deposition of sulfur and nitrogen acidifying substances to the environment. So this here is the criteria we use to do our geospatial analysis. The first one here is critical loads. We basically want to monitor in areas where there is low acidic critical loads, so basically low buffering capacity, less capacity for the environment to actually take up the acidifying substances. We want to monitor in areas where there's higher deposition of the acidifying substances. In terms of emissions, we don't want to monitor too close to one individual source. There's certain criteria that we set so that we are a certain distance, so we're not monitoring one individual source. We want to co-locate as much as possible with long-term soil monitoring sites, which are in place for the same purpose, to look at acidifying substances. We want to look at factors such as road criteria. We want to be close enough to roads so that we can access the site, but we don't want the traffic from the road to actually impact the emissions. And in brackets here, it talks about NADP siting criteria. So NADP stands for National Atmospheric Deposition Program. This is the program that's used in the United States. So we're adopting some of the siting criteria from that program for the sites that for our evaluation purposes. And in terms of land use, since the purpose of our program is to look at the emissions and deposition of acidifying substances on ecosystems, we want to be located in, we don't necessarily want to be located in urban areas or areas where there is predominantly human activity. So we're not focusing on urban areas, and a number of our stations right now are actually located in urban areas. So we did this analysis, and you can see the map on the right gives a nice picture of the results of the analysis using the criteria that I indicated on the previous slide. The areas in green are the areas that are most suitable for monitoring based on this criteria. So these are the areas that have the lowest buffering capacity. These are the areas that have the highest emissions of acidifying substances. And then the areas in red are the areas that are least suitable for monitoring. So you can see that it's kind of an area from western Alberta near the mountains, but not in the mountains, all the way up to northeastern Alberta. So what this indicates is we need to focus the precipitation chemistry monitoring in the green area. And we've made some suggestions for how to relocate or change some of our monitoring. This is the AEP monitoring based on this analysis. So relocate stations outside of urban areas. Currently we have a wet chemistry station in Edmonton, in Calgary, and also in Fort McMurray. Our suggestion is to relocate those resources outside of the urban areas into the areas that where the sensitive ecosystems are located. We want to co-locate one of the sites. This is Cold Lake with a soil monitoring site, so that's an opportunity. Our Dixon Dam site is located close to agricultural land use sources, which could influence the results. So we're suggesting movement of that site. All new stations should have, this might be a little bit technical for people, but all new stations should have precipitation gauges, and These precipitation gauges provide precipitation depth measurements that are required to calculate deposition. And right now what we've been using is the collectors to actually calculate the precipitation depth. So it's a little bit technical, but it's an example of one of the changes we want to make. We want to deploy the dry deposition monitoring units at selected wet deposition sites. So the dry deposition monitoring would likely be focused within the green area indicated on this map, and we'd look at a nominal number of sites to do this monitoring. Also, we want to implement common standard operating procedures across all stations and adopt a standard protocol such as NADP. So we're looking into actually doing this. And that is a big issue. I guess, you know, it seems like that's something we should have done a long time ago. But it is really difficult to get operators to actually operate some of these monitoring stations. And sometimes it's done on a volunteer basis. Sometimes it's done kind of as a side of the desk kind of job. We need to enforce the fact that, or maybe educate's a better word, we need to educate operators that they need to follow these standard operating procedures so that we have a better monitoring program throughout the province. So that's the example. So this is getting near the end. In summary, the 5-year plan, or this is what our grand vision is for the 5-year plan. It'll contain a core air monitoring program for the province that defines monitoring stations that are appropriate for use in CAKES and land use framework reporting. It will contain the acidic deposition monitoring network for the province, utilizing internationally accepted protocols and standardized operation. Monitoring gaps will be identified and project plans will be initiated to investigate the most appropriate approach to fill these gaps. A process for planning, prioritizing, and delivering focused monitoring activities will be included as part of this plan. We will also be evaluating new and probably more interesting and fun monitoring techniques to address some of our gaps. Some of them include testing and using self-contained portable monitoring systems. And one system that's used right now in Alberta is an air pointer type system. Still requires land power, but it's something that we need to look at potential applications for. Microstation technology in Alberta where land power is not available. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of different microstation technology systems that exist. We need to test those systems and see if they are appropriate to address some of those gaps. And also another one not mentioned on here is using satellite information to address those gaps as well. And where we can, we want to utilize citizens in helping us in delivering our monitoring activities so we can expand that spatial coverage. So the plan will be implemented by government, but where we can, we'll likely use partnerships such as airsheds or academics where necessary and practical. So now the last slide, this is the one you probably have to pay attention to. We're developing we're developing our questionnaire right now that will contain the following questions, and I'll send these out to you after this seminar. So we're looking at, I guess, big picture feedback on the long-term monitoring deposition, air quality and deposition monitoring program across the province. So the questions here are, what are the persistent air quality issues in your community that might need long-term monitoring? Is the current monitoring provided appropriate? Sorry, I should learn how to read. Is the current monitoring providing appropriate data to manage these issues? If not, what additional information is needed? The next question is, are there any concerns with how air quality data is currently collected, analyzed, shared, and reported on? And the last question, are there any elements missing on the scope of the document that you would like to see included and why? So again, we can talk about some of these questions, and I'm sure there's people have lots of questions on the phone. We can talk about some of these, but there'll also be opportunity to provide responses through a questionnaire that I'll send out. So I think we're done for now. We can. How do we want to do this? We want to start with the online questions.
We had a hand go up on your last slide. So.
You want to scroll?
Yeah, let's go back up a little bit. Okay, so I think we can start here.
Yeah.
So this is where we start. Sorry, the very top.
So we can read.
Yes. So
does everyone see the questions on the line on the phone as well?
Actually, I'm not sure.
But I will read them.
Yeah. We can go like that, or we can unmute. Would you rather unmute the person?
No, I'll go ahead and
okay.
read the
So
question. I think that's a better way of doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the first question is a question for the end, if not covered in the presentation, measurement tools to assess success of plan. Okay, I think that's a good question. Is that we need to establish, you know what, I did anticipate that question coming up, but we actually haven't talked about what performance tools we would be using to address the success of the plan. So I think that's a very good comment, and something that I think that needs to be incorporated as part of the scope of the plan. So a good comment. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so the next question we have, what would budget cost, why would budget costs not be considered as part of the plan, but can't be implemented if funding can't support costs? Yeah, so I understand that. So we will, I guess what we want to do is we want to, and you know, I'm not sure if the budget, the actual cost of the plan will be in there or not, but right now we're saying it's not. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have buy-in from Alberta Environment and Parks executive that are going to be paying for this plan. So we want to make sure that we get this plan done within a time frame that it still makes it relevant. And we want to also make sure that that our, like my executive within EMSD can stand behind what we've budgeted for, and that we can actually bring that up when it comes to requesting funding in the fall of 2018. So I understand, and I expected that question, why would they not be included as part of the plan? And right now I'm just saying they're not. They could be, and I think that's more a decision that will be made by my executive. Right now they said don't include them in a cost, so that's the reason. Go ahead.
Were we also directed not to consider funds because they didn't want funding to be the primary driver for the plan?
Well, I think that was one of Yaney probably didn't hear what Yaney had to say, but we didn't want to consider funding as part of the plan. Sorry, funds as part of the plan right now, because we didn't want to see it as a primary driver for the plan. So we'll develop the plan, and then we'll determine how much it will cost over the next 5 years, and we'll take that forward. And hopefully that will be an open process as well. The next question we have here is, will AEP consider to use passive monitoring data to estimate dry deposition in past or in future? That's a good question.
For the dry dep, I think Kevin is asking, are you thinking of using passives for
dry deposition?
Currently not.
Right.
For the example that you showed, we are still exploring what type of instrument to use, but we're thinking of more active sampling of ambient air rather than passives.
But we will consider the use of it.
Yeah, so I guess Kevin, just to respond to that question, is where we are looking at active monitoring methods to collect integrated samples for some of the parameters that are required for dry deposition. I think passive monitoring gives a very cursory measurement, and you can calculate dry deposition as part of that. But I'm not sure about the success of using passive samplers for dry deposition calculations at the present time. But we can have more conversations about that. The next question is, will AEP consider the use of, okay, that's the same question. Should clarify that numbers in the distributed model slide are continuous monitoring stations only, does not include the other monitoring types. Yeah, that's very true. So in the distributed monitoring slides, I only included the numbers for the continuous monitoring stations. I did not include the numbers for the passive monitoring stations or for the dry deposition monitoring stations. It was just intended to show that it is a distributed model for monitoring in a province. So next question, industry stations should be audited a minimum of every other year. Agree. Agree, resources are required to do that. We do have, actually just in regards to ambient auditing, we used to have one person doing that job. Now we have two people doing that job. So we're actually getting to the airshed stations more frequently. Next question, will industry members and commercial monitoring organizations be contacted to support development and evaluation of microstations and citizen science? Will they be contacted?
I guess they're asking who is going to evaluate, who's going to do the evaluation for the microstations and citizen science.
Yeah, well, I think what we're trying to interpret the question here.
Do you want to unmute that person so they can provide more?
Sure, yeah, if you wouldn't mind unmuting Matthew, if you're still on the line there. So we're going to unmute you, Matthew.
I don't think Matthew has entered his PIN to be unmuted.
We may not be able to unmute you.
No.
So I can try to respond to that as much as I can. So in terms of the evaluation of microstations, what we're planning to do is well, a number of searches have already been done to determine what are the different kinds of microstations that exist throughout North America and even other parts of the world. And a lot of other organizations are way ahead of us, and they're actually using these already. So I think we can take advantage of some of the existing evaluations that I've done. But I think what we need to do is number one, we need to determine what we're going to use the microstations for. So, based on previous information, what parameters work best and what are the power requirements. We need to really set up our criteria for the use of these microstations. And then we need to determine which ones would be most appropriate to meet those uses. So as an example, if we are to implement, if we need to monitor, let's say ozone in the middle of nowhere someplace in Alberta, we need to have a microstation that will monitor ozone and has fairly good results in terms of previous evaluations that have been done for monitoring ozone. If it's for H2S that we're interested in, then it may not be the same microstation kind of system. So I don't think at all I am answering your question. But we will, I guess another part of this is we will keep track of all these questions, right? We do have a record of all the questions, and then we can follow up with you afterwards. The next question is base cation deposition. I was thinking British Columbia deposition, but I think it's base cation deposition. Is a gap in terms of determining PAI. How does the plan address this? So I think maybe I might have to pass this question over to Yanni. Yanni is quite far away from the the microphone, so you won't. She might have to go over here.
Yes. So David, we recognize that we have a gap in terms of monitoring base cation deposition, especially from the dry component. Our precip monitoring currently has information for base cation deposition, but we are looking at how best to monitor from the dry component of the total deposition. I hope that answers your question. And then you will be, I mean, we showed the initial results, what Bob showed, and there isn't a lot of detail because this is just the initial presentation. But when we do the method presentation, some of these questions will be hopefully addressed, or maybe you can raise it again at that time.
Let me just try and unmute David here because I did see he raised his hand, so we can just check if that addressed your question. Or
so David, you can speak now. We've allowed you.
Thank you.
Only if you raise things, otherwise.
I've been biting my tongue. No, that's fine, Janie. It certainly is a gap, and there's a lot of uncertainty, as you say, regarding dry deposition, and we just need that information when we're doing our acid deposition modeling under the provincial acid deposition management framework, because even though we have some methods to try and extrapolate from wet deposition, it's very tenuous. So look forward to more details.
Okay, so we'll just mute you for now, David, and unmute you later. Okay, so the next question down here is, with the new data collected through this plan, will Alberta be more willing to participate in environmental assessments by a panel or of development projects in your province, such as frontier oil sands? So this is the kind of question I won't answer. But what I'll do is I'll keep this question, and I will bring it to. I'll find out what the appropriate answer is from appropriate people, and what I would like to do is keep a list of these questions and provide a formal response. Maybe formal is not the right word, but provide a response and then allow everyone to have access to that. So I actually, of course, I don't have an answer to that question. Next question is, meteorological information is necessary to, I don't quite see that word, to relate air quality to emission sources. What is the plan? What is the plan to improve information on regional scale of things like mixing heights and lower and upper wind profiles? So I think that's a really good comment, and there are also really, we talked about less expensive ways of doing things. There are also less expensive ways of measuring mixing heights and measuring meteorological profiles that are available now. So I think that is something, that we haven't thought about too much, but that's the kind of input we want, I think, for this plan. So I think that's a comment we can definitely take back and constructively incorporate. Next question is, the 2009 strategy had 7 subprograms. Which will those 7 subprograms be included in the current 5-year plan? So I think the scope of the 7 subprograms will be part of the plan, but they may not look exactly the same as they did in the 5-year plan. And just for others on the phone, there were 7 sub-programs related to population-based monitoring, related to spatial gaps, related to background monitoring, so on and so forth. So I think we're covering the same scope within this plan, but may be presented differently. So that's my response to that question. Next question has the ecological footprint of active monitoring versus passive monitoring been evaluated, such as in nesting areas of, SARA, is that what that says?
Yeah.
Areas. I'm not sure what SARA.
Species at risk assessment.
Okay, species at risk assessment areas. I think the answer probably is no, it hasn't been done. I think that
Does not mean it will not be done.
Right.
It's not being done.
Yeah, that's right.
right.
That's right. So this is something, but I'm thinking this is something that I think maybe needs to be considered especially when we talk to our ecosystem experts. So I think that's a good comment. And again, one of those comments that we as air people may not necessarily consider. So thank you for that. So the next one is, I don't.
No, we're doing it in-house.
They want clarification.
Oh, clarification. Sorry. Clarification. Will an RFP or grant system be released? So we're not planning to do any of this work through contractors at the present time. Next question is, if air quality data is to be used for trending, then need to establish the trending methodologies and approaches that will be used to ensure that data collected fits within the trending modeling that is being used. Does the plan include details on trending approaches that will be used? I would suggest that the plan itself probably won't contain trending approaches, but again, I think I talked about standard operating protocols for monitoring, for precipitation chemistry, and for passive monitoring. I think we also need to have common protocol for trend analysis as well. Yeni has a response, but she's way over there again.
I just want to clarify what David was, I think David is trying to say, because he's saying if you don't know what method you're using to do your trending, then how do you know what type of data you need? So we will not be planning the data needed without some thought on what type of trending method we'll be using. I think that's what he's asking.
I just unmuted David again, so he can
Go ahead,
clarify.
David.
No, that Yeni is the point, right? That you need to have an idea of how you're going to use the data to make sure that you're collecting the data the right data, so you can do the trending.
Thanks very much, David and Yeni. See, I brought Yeni here to answer the difficult questions. So we will move down to the next question. Will AEP review the 2009 monitoring strategy and provide which parts were fulfilled and identify gaps from the 2009 plan that will be included in the new plan? I would suggest as part of the process, the answer is yes. Will this be included in the actual plan? Perhaps very briefly at the beginning of the plan, but yeah, I think that's something that is part of the process, yes. Next question is there any provisions to conduct a midterm review and revision of the air monitoring plan if required? Okay, yeah, so I think that will be part of the process as well, because as you know, these plans are developed and they become, if they're static, they become out of date within 3 years and almost somewhat obsolete, I suppose. Or maybe obsolete is not the right word. I think in order to have buy-in from stakeholders and buy-in from government and buy-in from those who are funding it, it has to be renewed periodically, which means maybe every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. So that's a good point. Next question, will the new plan provide a framework for a new Alberta ambient air quality management system? I think that's a trick question, Sanjay. I would suggest no. I would suggest monitoring as part of the ambient air quality management system. Is it possible to unmute Sanjay? I'm not sure if he's on the phone or not. I know where he is though.
Yeah,
There we are.
We're going to unmute you, Sanjay, so you can maybe expand on that. So,
Hi, Sanjay.
Sanjay, you can talk if you want now. And now he's probably muted on his side.
Possibly. We can't hear you, Sanjay. If you're speaking and you're muted on your side, just make sure you're unmuted.
Okay, so
Okay,
maybe
come back.
yeah, so maybe we'll put you back on mute.
Just raise your hand, Sanjay, if you want some airtime later.
So the next question is cakes management levels have been triggered in a number of error zones, and future triggers are predicted to occur now that we have SO2 and NO2 cakes. Are focus monitoring plans being developed for this to be proactive rather than reactive? Yeah. I would suggest. I think that's an item for discussion. I'm trying to think of a intelligent response to that question. But I do think that's an area that needs to be considered, and whether we consider it and it's actually included within our 5-year plan, or whether it's referred to on our 5-year plan, and then we develop monitoring plans outside of that, focus monitoring studies outside of that. That's something we have to talk about. But again, I think that's the reason we have these webinars, just to get this kind of feedback. So that's appreciated.
So that's all we have in the chat box
Okay.
for now. We do have, Melissa had her hand up here, so I'm just going to unmute you, Melissa. And, oh, I think we just lost her. Okay. So that's all we have. If anybody else has a question, you can still put your hand up, the little hand icon over here, or if anybody who asked a question wants further clarification, just put your hand up or write something in the chat box so we can unmute you if you'd like. So we'll just give you guys a couple minutes maybe, just to be sure we don't miss anyone.
So does David have his hand up?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was a different one, but yes, let's check. Let's check with David. Did you have anything else there?
No, I didn't. Thank you very much, Bob. Very informative.
Okay, so we have a new question up here.
Okay, a new question. Oh, that's a long one. Okay, so it may be useful to build a bibliography of material that can be used to inform the current assessment task. The presentation noted previous network assessments, but there are also technology assessments, potential acid input studies, soil sensitivity mapping exercises, co-location studies. Partner organizations should be consulted to help put this together. I guess help build this list. So yeah, I think that's really good. A really good question, and we have developed a bibliography or a list of some of that of the network assessments. So we know about the network assessments that have been done, but we know less about the work that has been done that can influence this plan for the other media, such as the you mentioned the soil sensitivity work and the mapping work. So that is good. It would also be helpful if stakeholders have information on what Mike is asking here. That would help us. If you could provide us a link to it or the actual documents, that would be super helpful. Next question is, could we get a list of participants today? No, we can't. No, I think we can, right?
Absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
we can. Next question is, what is the logic for excluding agricultural areas from the monitoring? So the agriculture areas aren't excluded from monitoring. Agriculture was excluded from the precipitation chemistry assessment that was done because because of the criteria that was used for that analysis. I think it might be better for Yeni to answer that question, because that's not easy for me to do. So we're just waiting for Yeni to walk over to this side of the table, Allison, and we can respond to that one a little bit better.
So is it Alyssa?
Yeah.
So Alyssa, we had excluded that area from as a receptor mainly because of the application of fertilizer. So we didn't recognize agricultural land as sensitive ecosystem, and therefore we don't monitor in that area. And we also avoid monitoring very close to any kind of tilling and open soil areas, because that that doesn't give us a regional perspective of, especially for say base kata and deposition. So the aim that because we only have 9 sites, we try to make them regionally representative and not so much not to have very local influence. And that's why for the precipitation monitoring, we have opted not to include the agriculture area.
So Allison, I just wanted to build on that a little bit. So this is just for the precipitation chemistry monitoring, because the idea is to monitor in sensitive areas for acidifying substances and away from sources that may I guess, influence anthropogenic sources that may influence the readings, influence the data, and so that we're not achieving our objective. But monitoring in agricultural areas for parameters, ambient concentrations for parameters such as ammonia is definitely in scope of this activity. So I hope that addresses your concern.
She's self-muted.
Oh, so you're self-muted, I guess. So I'll go to the next one then. Are there any objections to sharing the list? No, of course not. We'll provide those. So transportation corridors are typically removed to avoid bias. Okay, I understand. But has there been any consideration to attempt to monitor corridors for the purposes of evaluating development contributions? So I think the transportation corridors, again, this is regarding the one example we provided. The transportation corridors were, we didn't want to get, for the precipitation quality, we didn't want to get that direct influence from nearby roads on the data.
The buffer area is like 500 meters.
Yeah, the buffer area is 500 meters from that transportation area. But I think, I think maybe I understand what you're getting at here is, do we want to attempt to monitor the corridors for the purpose of evaluating, development contributions? And we are looking at conducting additional roadside monitoring to understand what the influences of major road systems are on ambient air quality, and especially in areas where there are high traffic areas and where there are people, residential areas. So we are looking at roadside monitoring as, again, as part of our future work that we want to do, that would be incorporated as part of this plan, either implicitly or explicitly as part of this plan. So hopefully that somewhat addresses your question.
I think we tried unmuting Matthew earlier and we couldn't,
Yeah, I think
but let's see.
There you go.
Oh, there we
So we've unmuted Matthew. I wonder, did you want to see if we addressed your question okay?
No, I think that sounds pretty good. We've got significant amount of road traffic in between Alberta's 2 major centers or whatever, and there's a lot of plans to further develop it, like the QE2 and expanding that and kind of thing like that. So, just consideration. There's a significant contributor of pollution is along those corridors, and it's probably going to grow significantly. So I would assume that there'd be good value in trying to monitor that and understand what contributions would be affected from further development, I guess, and planning related to like the land use framework and that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, Matthew. So let's go
That's all we
down.
have for now. Oh, there's another one.
Okay, so who will approve the work plans associated with this monitoring plan? What role, input will regional and local stakeholders have in the work plans? Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So again, the work plan we're working on right now is the way it started, or sorry, the 5-year plan, the way it started was really to be EMSD's 5-year work plan. So the work that EMSD is planning to either lead or do with partners. I think what we're going to do as part of this work plan is we're going to develop this process for focus studies, and this will I think the work plans will have to go through EMSD's work planning process, which we do have a formal process to develop work plans. What we're I think I was going to say what we're delinquent on, but that's not the right word. What we don't have right now is we don't have a real good process to incorporate feedback or input on the work plans from stakeholders. The process we have right now, we get information from areas of the Department of Alberta Environment and Parks, and then our operations staff is usually connected to the various airsheds. So that helps provide the information needs from the airsheds. But at the present time, we don't have that real good connection between Environmental Monitoring and Science Division and the stakeholders, so that the stakeholders don't have that direct influence into the planning cycle. I do believe there is a plan to improve that in the future. However, that's not going to be easy to do. So right now, just to, I guess, make a more direct answer to your question is right now this comes in through the Environmental Monitoring and Science Planning process, and the plans are approved by the chief scientist. So that's the direct answer, but understanding that we do need to improve that process to include stakeholder information needs. Okay, is there any more questions?
Yeah, we have one more, Allison.
Okay, Allison, have you given any thought to having control areas and then areas where the effect is different sources that can be clearly attributed? Yeah, and so definitely for a number of different ways. Control areas, I guess when you say control area, that might be more related to a focused study, a focused experiment, where you're looking at areas where impacts could occur, and then you have a control area where is an area that you would not have impacts occurring. But also like on a province-wide or a region-wide basis, where we're looking at background monitoring stations, so what are called regional background monitoring stations. So these are areas where you would expect the influence from anthropogenic sources in Alberta would be a minimum, or they would be representative of a regional background. So I think that's the control area that we would be considering. So I think the answer is yes, but maybe I explained it not very clearly. Is there any more questions?
That's all we have. Oh, another one. Let's stop that.
Okay. Somewhat related to the effects of transportation corridors, could the scope include an assessment of contribution of emissions, distribution, transportation, municipal, industry, and agriculture? So an assessment of contributions of those. I think that, yeah, I think an assessment could be. So that would be, I would suggest that would be if, as an example, there's various areas of the province where we have elevated particulate matter concentrations, and where there's areas where we have those elevations and have issues that have been identified through the Canadian Ambient Air Quality Standards reporting process. Those would be the areas where we try to identify the contributions from the various emission sources. So that's kind of the way. So we would develop a focus study to do the appropriate monitoring so that we could actually identify the contributions from those emission sources. So I would say it would be in scope. but wouldn't be done necessarily routinely, but it would be done on a focused study basis. And I would definitely say this would be something that would be a priority for the Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary corridor. Any other questions?
We don't have any hands up. Wait a little bit to see if anything else pops up.
What's that? Still very quiet. Oh, that's true.
That's an old one.
It's too late.
So it looks like we may have ran out of questions. So first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for your participation. I really appreciate this opportunity. If you do have, first of all, we will be sending out a questionnaire. It'll be a document kind of illustrating the scope of the plan and also the questions we would like your stakeholders or stakeholders to address. And if you have other input, we're happy to receive that input as well. I also want to, if you want to contact me directly and discuss any issues, I don't have any problems with that, either through email or phone, but I'm not giving my phone number right now. But what I could do is when I send out the email, you will have my contact information, so you can contact me directly, because I appreciate those conversations as well. So as we said before, this has been recorded, at least except for the first couple of minutes. This has been recorded. We'll make this available. I think we have to find a web location to link this to, and we will develop the questionnaire. We're also going to develop a table with all the questions that have been received and our responses, and make that available to people as well. So thank you everyone for attending on this Monday morning, and look forward to talking to you in the near future.